Bum, ba-dum, ba-dum. Good morning. The sun is up. I checked. Bitcoin is running, and we're on our way. Got a fun episode today. I love life as always. This is a show where we try to look at how much the world is changing and talk about it a bit and sort of catalog it almost in real time. Hey man, good morning. Um, so everyone piling, we got a fun show today. Um, the first part of the day I want to talk about the Italian election again. And I want everyone who watches this show to know that, we're pretty pro LGBTQ, whatever the acronym is in your country. We're very pro, right? We're definitely um, interested in helping that whole part of the world and making sure everyone feels welcome and has a place in the new world that is coming out of this chaos. And I want to say, I mean it sincerely. I read a newspaper article in relation to the Italian election in Europe, right? The Italian election in Europe, and it was from Australia, from not only just Australia, Western Australia, so Perth. So we're talking 15,000 kilometers and a couple of oceans away from Italy. And they actually had a travel warning, right? They had a travel warning. And they put it in the biggest newspaper in Western Australia, the Western Australian Standard. It's the largest newspaper on the west coast of Australia, I'm to understand. And the headline was Election of Far Right Italian Government Prompts Warnings to LGBTQI, in this case, Australia, LGBTQI community to rethink travel plans. So the Australian newspaper sounds like they're warning the local LGBTQ population in Australia that they shouldn't travel or that there's a travel warning, right? A travel warning to Italy. Italy. Australia, the LGBTQ community in Australia has been warned not to travel to Italy. But this, you understand that Australians couldn't travel anywhere as of a couple of weeks ago, or even yesterday or something. I don't even know if they're all still allowed to travel. I mean, I was under the impression Australians weren't allowed to go anywhere. And now they have Italy knocked off the list according to this. But we're really against corporate media on this show, so we're going to go out and say to the LGBTQ plus community in Australia, if your country lets you out, if you can make it out of your country, you're going to be fine in Italy. I mean, I'm up. I could personally guarantee it to the extent possible. I will personally guarantee it. I will I would give a Bitcoin to anyone who suffered under LGBTQ discrimination, who traveled from Perth and Italy and then found this terrible result. Because I don't think you have anything to worry about personally. I think your own country that didn't allow you to travel to Sydney or Melbourne from across the west coast. I think it was something like 3 miles they were allowed to travel for a little while. They're allowed to travel like 3 miles, and now they're worried about some Italian anti-homosexual stuff, anti-LGBTQ stuff. So all I want to say is, if you want to have a big party, a big gay party, a big whatever party you want in Italy, I think you're going to be okay. I believe you will be just fine. Now, the 2 days ago, it was around yesterday, but 2 days ago, the Meloni video that we mentioned on the show here yesterday. So this is the reason, this female, this woman, is the reason why this travel warning was issued. And it gets even crazier because the video that we were talking about yesterday on this show, where she was discussing the perfect consumer, right? Saying, I want to be, why can't I identify as a wife, a mother, a Christian, an Italian? I have to be a number so that we're the perfect consumer. It was a very coherent argument. I don't think it let anyone be insulted other than maybe bankers or anyone who has a real incentive to motivate addiction or the perfect consumer piece, right? Anyone who loves that there's perfect consumers and a great labor pool out there, and who sees people as consumers or labor or anything like that, the video sort of insulted them, but it was fine for everyone else. It went viral. It really did. It went viral. The translation, and everyone was talking about it yesterday. Did you know that YouTube pulled it down? It's gone. It's off of YouTube. You can't watch it. They said community violating community guidelines. Now I know there's a lot of copies of it out there, but it's off of YouTube. So maybe they found someone who's insulted by this in some way. I can't see it, but I would love to know exactly. You never find out why, but in this case, it's much more egregious than anything we've seen with Russell Brand or with Bitcoin Magazine ourselves. We were shut down. I remember during during Bitcoin 2022 in Miami, and I'll get back to that because it's related. The speech that led to the talk on stage that led to the Bitcoin Magazine channel being taken down during the conference overnight, and all the videos erased, put back the next day, had to do with what we're talking about later on in this video with Meloni, because she mentioned something about France, and that was a big part of the video that led to Bitcoin Magazine getting suppressed once. So there you go, crazy. So the video is taken down, and the part where Bitcoin Magazine had their YouTube videos taken down in Miami had everything to do with the people who were on stage. You had Youngmi Park from North Korea talking about the commodification of human beings when the money fails, and how sex slavery becomes a natural event when you have really unreliable money in an extreme case. But they also had someone there from Africa, and they brought up something that I never knew. I never knew about this. And I worked in, close enough to central banks. I worked in the Canadian Senate and helped get the original Bitcoin study we did in the Canadian Senate going in 2013. So that's, my 10 years as a Bitcoiner being working full time in Bitcoin is coming up shortly. And at the time, I was very heavily involved in central banks, and our big thing was working with Mark Carney after the meltdown to figure out what was going on and what government could do and all that kind of stuff. But I never knew that Africa was subject to the Bank of France monetary policy. I even went to university in France. I'm from Quebec. If you saw the picture outside here, I live on the Vermont-Quebec border in order to have an optimized tax strategy. And I think it really helps me. Hey, Haru, how's it going, man? I think this is a great tax strategy. I get to live in a very pleasant environment in Quebec and in Vermont, and totally without huge tax liabilities for living in two large, heavy tax states. I just make sure I don't cross any boundaries as far as time in the country, but my kids get to, have the best of both worlds. Anyway, the point is, I know enough about France, and I was there when the actual euro came into place. So I was studying the central bank. I had no idea they had policy control over African countries. We're desperately trying to get the president of the Central African Republic that has adopted Bitcoin as a national currency, along with the other francs and everything that's there. We would love to get him at Bitcoin 2023. So look out for that. It's being worked on internally, and we're definitely paving the way. So I'm helping with the Bitcoin 2023 main stage and a lot of the keynotes this year, and to try and get some really interesting conversations. Not that haven't had them in the past. I think the content has been strong, but we're really going to put a lot of focus on Bitcoin and everything that's going on in the world this year. So real kind of World's Fair feeling to it. So I didn't know that. I learned that last year. I learned last year at Bitcoin 2023 new information that I had no idea about, that a central bank was running it. And it's relevant because the Italian leader, so we were kicked off for that video, and it's a big thing, right? It's kind of, is it a secret? How did I not know about it? Anyway, it's out there, so now people know about it. But this Italian lady, boy, did she make it public. Boy, did she make it public. So when they suppressed that video, there's a new video of her now that went viral yesterday because the other one was gone. So I think it's going to be whack-a-mole like this. So, and this is funny stuff. Watching leaders bicker like this is really great, right? This is the kind of hot conflict we've been missing between some countries, right? This is because they're getting it out, right? And she says it right away. So Macron, the president of France, and I lived in France again when he was elected. I was there in the early part of the 2017 run before we knew what was really going on with Bitcoin that year. I was running consultations in the French places where they have free banking, like Monaco, and I would go up to Geneva and all these places and try to help them understand what the heck's going on. So I was doing that back then. And so in 2017, I was there when Macron did his first run. Very suspicious I was of what was going on, what I saw. But he said, this is what he started the he said, she said. He said Italians, not her, Italians were disgusting for choosing her, and that they were cynics and irresponsible for this election. Right? They were disgusting and cynics and irresponsible for this election. Whoa, he didn't really hold back here. So, and the Italian press kind of agreed. Right? They're like, oh, we're oh, what did France say about us in Italy? Oh, what a shame, what a shame. Of course they agreed, right? Of course. And so she says, what a shame in her speech. So she says, what a shame. You got to see this video. I'll try and get it in the link in the description below later. But then her reaction is she lists the transgressions of France and asks if people also thought they were disgusting. So the first one, I didn't know about this. There's a part of it I didn't know. So she says, the French, is it disgusting that France, and it was Sarkozy at the time, so let's keep Macron away, right? It was Sarkozy, the previous leader, who summer vacations around here, by the way. I've seen him before in summer vacation. The darn Clintons come around here too. They come to my village. The simulation has a real sense of humor, and it's kind of torturing me. Did you know that Hillary Clinton wrote like a murder mystery set in Washington, D.C.? It was co-written, ghost-written by a woman named Louise Penny, who has a series of novels all set in a village called Three Pines. Of course, Three Pines is actually the village I grew up in. And so Hillary Clinton now comes and spends summers in my town. And if you didn't know, the reason why it's a simulation thing is I'm also a murder mystery writer and have a murder mystery book that I'll be promoting shortly about Bitcoin called Satoshi Wedding Murders. It's a fun murder mystery. There's nothing to it, right? It's a fun story, a romp around the future of a Bitcoin standard and what it might look like. Heavy AI in my story, heavy AI. But what a world we live in, right? That my own time. This writer got her start from books selling out of my little bookstore, which I helped physically build. Like I physically helped build the building when I was a teenager where the bookstore is held. But Hillary Clinton comes every summer now. Hilarious. With her husband. I mean, Bill Clinton comes too. So isn't that funny? So back to the discretion and the Macron fight. So Sarkozy came here. That's why I went on that tangent. Sarkozy used to spend summers here too. So Macron does not spend summers here. He's with his. I think his wife can't. She doesn't travel very much as much as he does. She's a little bit old, right? She's like 70 or something. It was his teacher. If you didn't know that, it was his high school teacher. So Macron. So she ends up listing the transgressions that France did. This is one I didn't know about when Sarkozy did it. I didn't know about this. She says France bombed Libya back in the Gaddafi time, at the same moment that Italy had gained certain energy concessions from Libya. I don't know any of the details. That's what she put in her speech. I don't know anything about it, but it's interesting. I never heard about that before. So she said Italy was supposed to get concessions. But what she says next is the important part. She then blasts them for saying that everything that happened in Libya, of course, created the migrant immigration crisis, which Italy is suffering through right now. So, and I think that's not in dispute, right? I think Italy, I think, a lot of immigrants after Libya fell, the weapons sort of perforated around the area. You had Arab Spring stuff going on at the same time as a result, all these weapons, and it was just chaos in the whole area. So although migrants came from every direction, Italy, being so close to Libya, had to take on a lot of them. And the next thing that she says is really important. She says this has led to the chaos of the immigration piece, and also the French police go to Ventimiglia, which is the first town on the Italian border with France, the French Riviera, then the Italian Riviera. But in the middle, just on the first part in Ventimiglia, so that's exactly where I was living in 2017. I would go to Ventimiglia. I would take a suburban train, not like a high-speed train or anything. And I would travel, I lived just outside of Nice, and I would travel along this little train. It was like 30 minutes. You'd cross the border into Italy. There was no border control going through because you were on this train. You'd get off, groceries, you could shop. But in the end, I couldn't even let my wife go, or my wife didn't feel comfortable going alone because there were so many homeless people and migrants, and it was just chaos. And I said, well, why are there so many more in Italy? Like, why is this town so full of this people without proper housing, people without, no one's taking care of them? Well, it turns out, and she says it in this, and I sort of understood at the time that the French police were pushing all the immigrants that would come into that southern area. You can't really go further north because the Alps come right down there. So you have this strip along the water where you can get across, right? You have to go there. There's no choice. It's just all urban on the water. It's the Riviera. I mean, the towns right on the French side. If you're not a super millionaire and you've been hoarding your Bitcoin for 10 years, it's not going to be easy to live there. It's really expensive. The Italian side, before it gets really nice further on, is pretty cheap. So that's, basically why I thought that was enough to explain it. But it turns out the police pushed them there. Crazy. But then, right, this is her line. So she points that out. So she says, France did this to us, big problem. Just reading some of these the secrets of Poland Chanel. Okay, everyone knows over here. I'll have to ask you about that in a second. So that's what's going on in Italy. And then she comes out and mentions probably the most disgusting piece of it all, right? And she says, the way she says it is great. And most of all, because things have to be said, right? That's the translation. Things have to be said. Disgusting, she says. And the Italian word for disgusting, vomitia. Vomitia. I didn't know that. I don't speak Italian. Vomitia. It's not that in French. Sometimes the French and English and Italian words can be close enough. It's not that. Dégoûtant in French. Dégoûtant, disgusting. It's kind of similar to the English word. Vomitia. I could say that, but as gross a word as it is, it's a nice way to say it. Vomitia, right? Vomitia. Vomitia that France continues to exploit Africa, she says. She said it right out loud. Vomitia that France continues to exploit Africa by printing money to 14 different African countries, charging seigniorage, right? They charge them seigniorage, mint fees. Didn't know that. They don't even have money of their own in France, but they're still printing money for these folks in Africa and getting the seigniorage off of it, right? Seigniorage is a French word. Minting money, the act of it is called seigniorage, seigniorage. In French, seigneur is lord, right? It's a lord. It's not it's not signing or anything like that. Seigneur, not senior, seigneur, right? Means lord. Just like in we got lords in England, they had lords in France, and lords were called seigneurs. And minting money to this day is called seigniorage, right? The right of a lord to print the money. Very medieval concept, but that's where the word comes from. And so they get to charge their seigniorage, right? And now what I love about all of this, the good news about all of this, right, is the next time Macron and her meet, it's going to be a lot of fun. I don't know if it's going to be so polite. I'm hoping anyway it won't be so polite. I would love to see a bit of bickering and all this stuff. It would be just great, right? It would be a lot of fun. And especially if they use these vomitia words, right? Vomitia, that'd be great. But the best part of it is, now let's go look at the Nord Stream question, right? So everyone talking about follow the money on Nord Stream. I've never seen a case where follow the money works so well, frankly, right? I mean, you'd have to be blind not to know that Americans had involvement here. Not only the American government, I think it has almost nothing to do with the American government, because if it was purely about the government, they could probably have a lot more patience for what's going on, right? I saw a bit of urgency there. And the only way the urgency of blowing up those pipelines make any sense is if American companies, right, energy companies, gave assurances to Europe and European leaders that they would make up the difference for what they're losing from Nord Stream, right? Otherwise, I don't think it makes any sense. We saw on CNN, and you got to give CNN credit for a second here. CNN looks like it's trying to pivot to real news with the ownership. And they had John Brennan, who's a known liar, right? He's one of the 50 people who signed the letter saying the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation and all that stuff. So this guy, right, known liar, he signed his name to it, right? He signed his name to a known lie. So known liars. He was on CNN and he said, well, it was being peddled the past 2 days. Well, I think Putin might have blown up Nord Stream. I think Russia might have done it, right? CNN actually said the words, but why wouldn't he just turn it off? right? Why would he just turn it off? And then the answer was, well, he's got some financial deals that might not go through because he's got to keep up his financial reputation if he lets the contracts, and so he sabotaged it. Oh, I get it. So they're going to have more confidence in a guy who torpedoes infrastructure than who doesn't live up to their contracts. Okay, so CNN actually pushed back. You got to give them credit, right? You got to give them credit. Maybe they are separating themselves from known liars. That would be great if they didn't have known liars. Like you can have a liar on your show. You didn't know he was a liar. Oh, I didn't know a liar. I had a liar on the show. But if you have known liars, if you have people who sign their name next to a lie and then the lie is known and then the name is still signed there and it's never been taken back, then known liars. So you got to be careful of those people. So they're getting away from them. But here's the thing: if the French leader and the Italian leader are now dealing with this Nord Stream thing, and it sounds like you had American corporate assurances. If you follow the money, it becomes pretty obvious that American corporate interests have a certain sway out there and are making determinations. They probably wouldn't be the same determinations if it was just a political entity in charge running the military, but it looks like the military did act on behest of American corporations, right? I don't mean this in a sneaky, sinister way. I think American corporations explain to the military that yeah, we can get rid of this pipeline, and Germany can't even waver on the price and dealing with Russia anymore because American interests can resupply them. So I don't think the military went off and did this on their own without understanding the consequences. I think American corporate interests backstopped it, which is not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing, right? That is, I'm not indicting American energy interests um, promulgating right now, right? It's not, that's not what this show in particular is about. There's good and bad about it, and um, as long as everyone in Europe gets some heat this winter, maybe we're okay for now. I predict Europeans are heading south. I think there's going to be a mass exodus, one of the biggest exoduses we've seen from Europe in a long time. Just because why spend their sinking money on energy prices where they can go where it's warm, and I think you're going to get a bit of a hollowing out over the winter. I could be wrong, but what I want to see now. So I believe that the leaders sort of under the European leaders understood from American corporate interests and everything what was going on, and they had assurances. So when it, right, they were all okay with it. It wasn't a surprise. But now we have this Italian leader. I don't think she got the memo. Right? I don't think she got the memo on this. So I'm very curious about what's going to happen in this fighting. And if she's willing to point out what France is doing for energy, is she going to point out other things? Maybe, maybe. Um, and that really does bring us to our board, right? Because the board here, I think, becomes very clear when we consider the latest in energy fighting, and I'll explain what the board is all about. So, first of all, the board is heavily influenced by the fourth turning historic model. So if you haven't heard about the fourth turning before, or you have questions about the fourth turning, I put a link in the description to a video by Van Neistat, who's one of the best YouTubers out there. And it's just a gorgeous video. You don't need, please, whatever you do, don't read the book, The Fourth Turning. It's written by academics and is almost not readable anymore, right? It was written in the 90s, 1997. It's a big waste of your time. Don't do it. The video takes about 10 minutes to watch, and Van Neistat puts some of the greatest special effects you'll ever see in a YouTube video. So please go for it. Read the book if you really want to, but honestly, I've read it, and you'll get more out of the 10-minute video than you will out of reading an academic textbook. Just know that the word millennial comes from the textbook written in 1997. They predicted what millennials would be, and they coined the word millennial. So the book has a lot of value, and if you read that style of stuff, go for it. But I mean, I don't have the attention span for it anymore, and so go ahead. But the video is just as good. So it argues that history moves in these 80-year cycles, which are really just the life frame of 4 generations, and within those 4 generations, you hear, good times create weak men, and it's that whole kind of cycle, right? But it really works, right? It works. It's a good frame to look at the past, and they wrote it in 1997 and predicted today, so it looks like it's an accurate tool to predict, and that makes it, I think anyway, a really useful book, a really useful frame. What I've done here, and the book is written about Anglo-American history. I think it would pertain to any country in the world, but it's calibrated, it's timed for the American cycles. I'm not sure if everyone around the world times up with America in these cycles, but America, sets them in this case. So um, something happened each time we've had one of these and they argue that every one of these 80 years, there's a huge conflict that, sort of resuscitates and at once destroys and at once rebuilds, like a forest fire situation, right? So every 80 years, you have this cataclysm and things change after, fundamentally change. So in the Revolutionary War, it ended in 1783, right? So I've put the endings of each of the wars here. Revolutionary War ended in 1783. A common sentence, the way you would have described American perceptions or anything if you were writing in one of these newspapers after 1783 is, you would say the United States are. Or that's how it was written in the standard form. The United States are. Right? Together, collectively, the many states are doing something. It's just a plural, right? Now, the Civil War happens 80 years later. 1865, it ends, and something major happened. Something major happened after that. Consolidation of power in the federal government, everything that happened after with Reconstruction, just the perception of the Union at the time, the legacy of Lincoln, let's call it, politically, not how much he helped people and all the other stuff is a bigger legacy. I just mean the institutions he left behind when he was killed, after he was killed, and the way it was discussed after, turned into, from the United States are to the United States is, right? In the late 1800s, everything was the United States is. The Civil War caused are to become is. If you watch Ken Burns' Civil War documentary, which was written in which was created in the late 80s, early 90s, something like that, he's got this great historian named Shelby Foote who wrote the encyclopedic resume of the Civil War, and that was his whole conclusion, right? So that's in the video. I stole this comment from this Civil War video, where he says that's what the Civil War did. We traded an R for an is. We traded an R for an is, right? So 1805. If you go 80 years later, right, now we have World War II. Now this one, I'm taking some liberty, but I think it's pretty accurate. What ends up happening after the Civil War is you start talking about the federal government in the United States, not the United States are, right? The federal government is. You start talking about the FBI, the military, institutions created by the federal apparatus. You could even just say the Fed, right? We think of the Fed and Bitcoin as the Federal Reserve, which is not a federal institution at all. It's a banking trust, right? But the banking trust, the Fed, has a lot to do with federal institutions. They're separate, but the banking trust, the Fed, is related to the financing of federal institutions and enjoys the privilege of the dollar, right? The privilege of having the global reserve currency is a major feature of the federal union in the United States. It definitely has a big impact on almost every decision, both microeconomics, our decisions to choose and eat things and what we eat and what we get and what we import and what we make and all that stuff is definitely affected by these institutions and this bank trust. So it's very typical now to just talk about these institutions in the singular form, right? The Fed is. So it went from the United States are to the United States is. And now there isn't even an abstraction about states, right? It's just the Fed. The Fed is. Right? The Fed is. And when you look at what has happened, right? Whoops, that isn't, let's say, that isn't, so clear until you start looking at what happened with Nord Stream. And you start looking at the impact of US hegemonic federal institutions. Hegemonic meaning no competition. Now, think of yourself in Europe's position. The American corporations and military apparatus comes to your leaders and says, we're going to blow up your pipeline. We're going to shoot it. We don't care. We'll give you the oil. Don't worry, we got plenty. We're going to send it all over in ships. You're not going to have, it's going to cost a little more, but we got it. We got you. Don't worry. We're going to do this. And you're Europe and you say, oh, good, I want to do something else, right? Can you? Can you anymore? I don't think so. You're just another competing interest. right? Italy, Libya, France, who cares, right? These institutions have their goals, their motivations, and they're going to see them through. And everyone is just part of this, tribal sort of attitude. There's no like cooperation necessarily, unless it's for a mutual benefit in this case. But this is things being dictated to Europe. So I think more than ever we see that the federal institutions don't really have much forced compromise, right? They can kind of do what they want. They might have to smooth the edges, but right, they get to write the book here. And when we look at where we are at, it's been 80 years of that, right? Now, to win World War III, which it looks like we're in, we've been talking on this show as if we're in World War III from the moment we started it. It's been almost a year now since we first started this show. And we've only been talking about us being in World War III now, right? We're not waiting for an official declaration. We're pretty satisfied that the conditions are there for us to be in World War III. But how do we get out of it? How do we win? Right now, I don't know. I continue to not think it's going to be such a hot war. I could be totally wrong. I just don't see much appetite for fighting on the part of most Americans and lots of people in the world. I think we're pretty happy with our phones, and as apocalyptic as that might sound, I don't think there's much appetite to fight because we're too distracted. So, but there are people who are so angry, so we never know. But the way out of it, the way out of it, the way I see us being able to go forward is another one of these changes, right? The USR, the US is, the Fed is. We really need to change these two words again, right? Now it's not just one we have to change, it's both of them. We got to put it to the states are. And when I say the states, I don't just mean nation states. Don't forget, Bitcoin is a state machine. It's a state machine, literally a machine for state. And we look at Italy, we look at all these other tribes, if you will, right? We start to see is federated oligopolies, federated groups working together to advance their interests. And so there is a certain amount of cooperation that will have to be injected into the system. I think if you look at the bullying attitude America took recently, it's creating a lot of ill will in Europe, right? They said no to the energy, but watch the currencies devalue at the same time. I heard this guy, David Bell, I love the guy, Macrodesiac. He's got a Twitter following, right? Just looks like a normal London trader, having a great life, has some jokes, funny guy, likes Bitcoin. He said, you know how Americans look at Floridians? That's how all the Europeans look at you. And look, I mean, I'm very pro-American, very pro-USA. Not the government, not many of the institutions, but the ideas and what's trying to be accomplished here by American people. And I've sort of been all over this country. I love it, warts and all, right? I love it, warts and all. And when I hear that kind of stuff, it makes me think that the ability on so that's just a small level. That's a Twitter commentator, insulting Americans. Nothing new there, right? Nothing new there. But I think these identities, especially with the behavior of the federal government and the federal institutions, the Fed, and now the corporate actors, right? That's an oligopoly unto itself. With them acting the way they are, it's forcing this stuff into the light. If you could have as an example as clear as the Nord Stream one of follow the money and corporate interests and the bullying of the national security apparatus, you start to see a formula whereby Europeans and normal Americans can start to say enough is enough with this one particular collection of folks. And there could be a way to piece together all these different things. And I think that's where Bitcoin and Bitcoiners have a real role to play, because we get to choose single issues all over the world, right? We can choose single issue politics that are good for Bitcoin in every different jurisdiction. Whatever jurisdiction is closest to flipping our way, we can do it, right? So if you take a look at Italy and Europe now, she's talking about perfect consumers. That's a perfect battleground for the no KYC stuff. If we look in America, we've got all these energy policies going our way, right? That's where we can be single issue about it, right? We can be single issue about further enriching American energy companies, the same ones I'm sort of indicting right now about Europe and running the military. I think they just want money, and I think if they are able to increase their capacity here in America, they'll be just as happy, right? They got to sell it and all that other stuff. So I think, Bitcoiners don't really have a choice. We've got to deal with American energy interests, and we got to make them even richer. I mean, believe it or not, we've got to enrich them even more. I think there's room for startups and all kinds of new stuff within that context, but still, it's part of what we got to do. So we now have a chance in every little country to pick a single issue and vote in a block, right? To really, as a state machine, as these states can be anything, they don't have to be nation states, right? They can just be tribes of people who are coordinated on single issues. And I think we can push the boundaries here and there. And again, all we need to do is change people's perceptions so they start thinking about not hegemonic US institutions behaving in a way the Fed is. And we get them to start thinking about the states are, right? It's just two words. But really important stuff. Really important stuff. All right, I'm going to see um, some of these quotes here. Secrets de Polichinelle. I don't know what that means, guys. I would love to know. I'll look it up. I will look it up. I will look it up. But that's all I got for today, guys. That's all I got for today. I think the board makes sense, right? We have this 80-year cycle each time. And this is the thing that changes the most. The conclusion of the change each and every time is just these two words, right? You can actually distill every change in one of these major conflicts down to these two words. And it's our job to change them. We've got to normalize the states are, right? We've got to normalize the states are again. That everyone knows, but no. Okay, so I got Huru here telling me. I guess he's French. He speaks. I like it. So he sees secrets de polichinelle just basically means things that everyone knows out loud, but no one says it. Right? You just don't say it out loud. And I think that's what we're going to see more and more of. Right? I think we're going to see that's what I love about this Italian lady. Right? It used to be like you didn't when you were in a country, you didn't let there was a sort of a feeling that you don't like you want to keep your own problems in your house and fix them on your own and not maybe let everyone in on it. I think that's all gone. I think she's looks to me like she's not taking any prisoners and is going to be as impolite as required. And we need that, right? We need that. We need sometimes you need a bit of risk and people who will say the thing that is so rude, but we can't get to the states are without doing that, right? It's a shock to the system that's required each and every time. Now, I don't want these are all bloody. I mean, just unbelievably bloody, right? We can do this without bloodiness. We can. Maybe some poverty and there's definitely gonna be stress, right? Huge stress. But let's not go too far. All right, guys. That's all I got for today. We'll see you again tomorrow. We're gonna do it daily. We're gonna do it daily. I think that'll give us the practice, the exercise, right? Exercise. Lots to talk about every day. So there you go. Who says, especially the monetary? Yeah, yeah. Like I didn't know. How is it that I didn't know that? I mean, went to school in France. Uh, have been studying money as it is for quite a while. I had no idea about Africa. I mean, it may be my fault, right? Maybe I just didn't take it. Maybe the answer was there for me the whole time. I just didn't have an interest. Could be that. Maybe people have even told me. Being a Montrealer originally, so many people from Cote d'Ivoire and Senegal and all these French-speaking African countries would come to Quebec, and so I very normal for me to meet African people who speak French. It's every day, right? Every day. I mean, they say, "Oh, it's crazy back there," and don't listen. But I've been in weddings and all this stuff, Burkina Faso weddings, and all this stuff, and they don't ever. I mean, they never told me, right? But I mean, maybe I didn't ask or something. It could be my fault, but what I'm seeing here is, yeah, so Gladstein wrote a fantastic piece. Yeah, he was on stage, if I recall, for that at Bitcoin. Um, and we've got here who were saying again, not at all. Pan Africans began raising the question only 5+ years ago. Yeah, that would make sense. I think that's another thing that Bitcoin did. I think it's like one of those. We knew fiat money coming from issued from a government was kind of new. You just didn't know how new, right? You didn't know how new. You didn't really ever ask what was it like before. In Canada, we're a little bit lucky because we had such a comic book history of money, because it was such a crazy place originally, that those seigneurs, those French people who came originally, actually made our money off of playing cards because we didn't have any specie here. There was no paper. I mean, the papyrus, or not papyrus, the birch bark wasn't working, and so they didn't know what to do. So they did that, and in our case in Canada, those playing cards are like they're in all the museums. A lot of them survived, right? A lot of them survived, and then I guess we have really weird expressions in the French language in Quebec. $1 is a pièce, a piece of silver, a Spanish piece of silver, a Spanish dollar. We don't say a quarter. Don't ask me why. We say 20 sous, 20 cents. Even though it's 25 cents, we always say, oh no, sorry, 30 sous. Yeah, 30 sous. They say 30 cents for a 25-cent piece, right? We have quarters that all the money is the same as the United States, 10 cents, penny, nickel, dime, quarter, some 50-cent pieces, really rare. Um, but it's a quarter. We call it a 30 sous because it comes from the Spanish dollar time when it wasn't issued by a central government. It was the Spanish silver dollars, and they came in denominations of 30 cents, not 25 cents. So the word just continued on, and interestingly enough, we learn about this in Quebec normally. Uh, so Huru says again, in France and Belgium, we've been saying cents since the euro came. I started that. I was there when the euro came, and I told them I can't use their centime anymore. I got sick of it. It's cents, man. And I'm not. I didn't really start it, but I bet at the time it was going to be cents again because centime were still being. There was a time when they were sort of both around francs um, and euros. I counterfeited euros the night they came out. Full on counterfeited them. It was New Year's Eve. They came out on New Year's Eve, and drinking and crazy shit. And we just hooked up a printer, man, and took the money to the bar. nobody cared. It was New Year's Eve. That was the bet. No one cares. So and everyone had new bills, right? Everyone had brand new bills. So the bet we used a little exacto to perforate them, and the kind of activities you can do when you're just a kid and having fun. It was a good time. The Yeah, the what was I going to say about the French franc for a second? Oh, but I miss, the worst part. The worst part about the euro, as far as I'm concerned, is they got rid of the franc bills. Do you know how beautiful they were? The 50 franc, which is like, I don't know, the $8, $9 or something like that at the time, was the Little Prince. It was the writer Antoine de Saint-Exupéry was the character on it. They didn't do. I loved it. They didn't do. Oh, we got to talk about that. One thing we got to say before we go. I meant to even talk about that today. This is another argument for the states are the Queen when she died, right? Last 2 weeks ago, and then now she was put on the ground last week. The simulation is just a winking this whole time, and the pound yesterday, or it's been 2 days now, just into the ground, right? So the Queen, face of the money, in the ground, money in the ground. It looks like if you want to keep this, the Fed is, and everyone's in their place, and everyone's doing the same things they did in World War II. The king and his face on the money have to be as successful as the Queen and her pound were. It won't work otherwise. I don't think so anyway. Everyone, if the king can't get his money rolling, he's going to look elsewhere. He's got ambitions, right? He's not just going to sit there and say, "Oh, this America and all this stuff," right? He's going to turn that island back into a money laundering paradise, right? And not that he can do it, but I mean, he certainly, if he's smart enough, can help put the pieces in place. But now, look, it's clear they got to put the new face, so the money's brand new, right? They got to build up as much trust in the pound and all the institutions as they had before. Otherwise, it's the Fed is not going to wait for the pound. They don't care. There's no sentimentality about the king and his face and his portrait and which portrait's going on the money, and they don't give a shit, right? They will let it fall as far as they need to if energy prices remain coupled to the US dollar the way they are, right? There's just no way around it. Right? They don't give a shit about Britain and all their stupid money. Who cares how old it is? It's just dumb pound. So, and now we got who asking, what if Charles dies next year? Yeah, I mean, they got to get that money printer going again. They got to print it again. I'm waiting to find out what happens in Canada. What are we going to do with all these bills with her face on it? You know, I'm making everyone sad every time. They love her, man. They got to look at this old dead lady. You know, people loved her like they love their own family. And rightly, she was a type of genius, I think. I mean, a real genius, right? I've believed that for years. Like, not, you know, not a monarchist, not a monarchist. Happy to be living in the United States. Barbados, we got rid of the Queen this year, the newest republic in the world. Very proud to be, working with a new republic. Very proud, right? I love it. I love it. But I understand the importance and the grace of a good queen, and she was a good queen, right? And no doubt about it. Now they all got to get. Now it's a new money, right? They might say it's the same in institutions and blah, but nobody gives a shit, right? Nobody cares. The picture of this has to work, right? If it doesn't, they're coming with us to the states are, right? And the states in this case are Great Britain and Bitcoin and everybody, right? Everybody, even the Americans, right? And we can see in the United States that is really the way Bitcoiners can affect this is to start seeing the United States as what they are, states again, right? Go back to the USR. And we're seeing it anyway. There's nothing we have to do individually. We just have to keep following the money, right? We have to keep following the money because there's states who are telling us we can make Bitcoin there, and there are states who are telling us we can't make Bitcoin there. So you just go where they're telling you to make Bitcoin. But luckily, the United States is so hobbled from a federal point of view deliberately, right? Deliberately very weak federally. It's usurped power, but in fact it's weak because the states themselves should be thought of as countries, and they just haven't because of the sheer size and scale of the World War II. The way I continue to see it is this: we won World War II. America won World War II. It built this machine to win World War II. It was military. It was a confluence of corporate interests working with the military, and in the end, also a big bureaucracy. Right? They created this huge bureaucracy. The federal government was created to mobilize and achieve victory, and it did. Right? It was one of the greatest things you could ever imagine. Heavily inspired by what Germany was doing at the time, and every country was kind of going this way. So they go and do it, and then America, right? They never turned the machine off. The machine that won World War II just kept humming. Right? This big diesel aircraft carrier type device kept operating. It just kept running. And the goal of World War III is to shut off the World War II machine, as far as I can tell. It's to shut it off. And I continue to think that the no hot war thing, in my opinion, comes from this. And this is what goes to the states are and the oligopolies and almost a warlord period. Really, almost a warlord period is what we're heading into, I think. It comes from, I think you're going to see, when I said it was an aircraft carrier, I continue to predict, and I've predicted since the first time I did the show, and I continue to predict it. It was true when we saw the tanks fail in Ukraine. Modern military infrastructure cannot compete. It cannot compete with the new satellite-based drone infrastructure, the payloads that can be delivered. I saw the president of Estonia, a beautiful female, shooting a javelin the other day. I mean, if that doesn't show you where things are headed, leaders back on the front line of a battle, just like it used to be here. The leaders used to show up at the battles. That's how they were leaders, right? They used to spend time practicing, fighting. That's why you see them if you watch the Game of Thrones and all that stuff, that's why you see these kings dueling and fighting, because real leaders were on the battlefield before. Kings, in fact, made a comeback because they started getting associated with standing national armies. That's what created countries after this whole when the lords had their own private armies and kept kings in check. That's almost what we're headed back to, right? It's almost like going back to the Magna Carta times, back to the medieval times when smaller groups could have their own types of armies. Because you're going to see an aircraft carrier that requires a federal institution to build because it's so complicated. You're going to see an aircraft carrier with the beautiful F-35s, $2-3 billion a pop on the deck, 20 of them on the deck. You're going to see the whole thing sink into the water, like soon in our lifetime. You're going to see it sink in the water. And when I say in our lifetime, I mean like seasonally soon, because the drones, they cost nothing, right? I can send an army of $50 drones. I think eventually I could take it down, right? If they just have Molotov cocktails in them, I mean, eventually the aircraft carrier is coming down. And the ability to mobilize these things is just so asymmetrically cheap. It's kind of like a Bitcoin thing, right? It's kind of like hashing. It's like easy in one direction, hard in the other direction, right? So aircraft carriers are going to find out very hard to build an aircraft carrier, very easy to break one, right? We explain hashes with breaking plates, right? That's the best way I've ever heard to describe what a hash is. Very easy to break a plate, very difficult to re-engineer the plate to the point where you couldn't tell it was broken. It's literally impossible, right? Breaking a plate's easy, gravity. It's the same thing. It's about the same distance, right? Building an aircraft carrier versus taking one down with drones. It's a different world, right? It's a different planet. So that's what we're hoping for. We're hoping for the king to realize he's got to pump that coin, and he can't do it if he spends too much time with the Fed, right? He's got to promote his own interests. He's a king, right? He's not a state governor. He's a darn king. Let's see if he can do it. All right, team. Thanks. See you tomorrow.